Welcome to Talking Tactics, a show about insights and the results they ignite. I'm Safania Stevenson, a brand strategist and cultural analyst in the wonderful world of marketing. And every other week, I dig into the aha moments that changed everything for a higher education marketer. Each episode of Talking Tactics starts with an insight, following it from observation to action that created measurable results. We're talking about the breakthrough moments that happen with scrappy resources, and sometimes we'll even explore the tactics that, crashed and burned, because there's also value in trial and error. Your next innovative idea might be hiding in your data, your hallway conversations, or your own gut instinct. So let's get to it. Welcome back to another lovely episode of Talking Tactics. The good thing about today's episode is, one, we're going to be talking about employee advocacy, but two, you're going to know exactly who's talking because we've got some cool accents in the house today. I am joined by Ben Hayes, Senior Account and Community Manager, and Maria DeMario, who is also Head of Editorial for Hubbub Labs. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for
having
having us.
So today we are talking about employee advocacy. Like a lot of times, in higher ed, we're super focused on, community and hyper focused on students. But actually, this episode, we are going to look inward at faculty, staff. Before we start that, though, tell me a little bit about Hubbub Labs.
So we are an education marketing agency. We are based in Barcelona, Spain, which is a lovely place to be based. But we have an international team. We're a remote first agency. So we work with people from all over the world, and our clients are also all over the world as well, primarily in the education space. So that goes from publishers to assessment providers to higher ed clients. We work with a really nice mix of companies.
Ben, tell me a little bit about your role as a senior account and community manager. What does that mean?
Good question. It's for me, I worked in marketing for a long time in the UK before I came to Barcelona. And when I arrived, I decided I wanted to completely change and became a teacher instead, an English teacher. And then a couple of years ago, I started at Hubbub Labs. And actually what was wonderful, because it's an education marketing agency, it kind of pulled together those two strands of things that I loved. And then on a day-to-day, I work with clients to ensure that they're meeting their needs. So it can be producing content, short form, such as social media, long form with blogs, newsletters. I also work with the community team. So the people who actually go online and respond to comments and who are the brand voices on a day-to-day basis.
Cool. I feel like employee advocacy has become kind of like this buzzword. How do you all define what employee advocacy is?
Employee advocacy, at its most kind of simple form, is using your team's voices to actually amplify the brand voice and make real human, authentic, genuine connections. And so that can then have the knock-on effect of helping student recruitment, helping conversions. But at a very base level, it's humans talking to humans.
That's a really nice definition. As far as why universities should care about it, I think that most marketing is taking something kind of boring, a product, and making it seem exciting and desirable. But a lot of the time, higher education marketing seems to do the opposite. Universities are incredible places, like doing so much exciting research, really inspiring academic work, but that often doesn't come through in the marketing. So I think that employee advocacy is really a chance to tell those stories in a unique way. It's about connecting with your academic community and helping their voices to shine. It's authentic, it's engaging, like the academics want to get their work out there. But what is sometimes lacking is a framework for that to happen.
Gotcha. And I know as we were kind of prepping for this episode, the hot take was employee advocacy actually isn't for everyone. It's not for every institution. What are some of those red flags that tell you that a university isn't ready for a big employee advocacy framework?
It's a great question. Generally, people, when you suggest employee advocacy, are quite nervous about posting because it's quite intimidating, the idea of putting your thoughts out there for other people to look at, to judge, to interact with. Um, but that's a normal part. That's a normal fear that people have. If people are scared to post because they're scared of some sort of blowback or problems internally, then that would be a huge red flag for me, because actually employee advocacy has to start with trust, and it has to start with the right kind of nurturing culture and an empowering culture. And I think one of the things that you see kind of increasingly from many brands, but especially from kind of higher ed, is this kind of reluctance to put their head above the parapet and to say anything that could be deemed controversial. And so it's a really big red flag when people are just essentially scared to put something out there.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that. I think another red flag for me would be is if a lot of the marketing goals within a university are really short term. And I do think this is like a sort of pitfall for a lot of higher ed marketing, because the student year moves in a cycle, right? You have like enrollment, and you have graduation, and you have recruitment, and so I think a lot of universities can fall into this short term, like this campaign, the next campaign, but actually employee advocacy it's about the long of it rather than the short of it. It's more about brand building. And I think without that understanding, you can't launch a program like this and say, okay, 6 weeks later, we want to see the results. You have to have a more longer term vision.
I also think, kind of linking back to kind of the marketing team, I think also if you have a marketing team that works in isolation and so isn't connected to the areas of the university, that's a red flag, because actually they're not going to understand the potential within the professors, within the support staff, within these people who come into contact with the students on a daily basis. Similarly, if you have a marketing team that isn't empowered or is scared or is restricted by people higher up, then that's another red flag. So you have to have all these things balanced for it to be able to, for employee advocacy to be able to work.
Yeah. And I think one of those big things is like with employee advocacy too, is you really look for, and some of your best people to roll out with are people like the first people to raise their hands, and kind of like what you were saying, Ben, about that community of trust. If you don't feel comfortable and safe enough to like raise your hand and put yourself out there, you're like, well, who's going to help us? Who wants to be the first person to help us roll out this LinkedIn content strategy or blog content strategy? And everyone's looking around to each other like, oh, who's going to be the first brave person to raise their hand?
Yeah, and it's interesting. That's a really interesting point as well, because also a lot of the time, the people who are the ones who are willing to raise their hand first or to shout the loudest aren't actually the best people to do it.
Oh,
The loudest person or the person with the biggest number of followers isn't always the best person. Actually, you need to have a culture where, kind of like you were saying, people feel brave enough to be like, well, I'm not certain, but I think I would like to do it. And a lot of the times, like in everything, those voices kind of get pushed down by the louder people. So you have to have that kind of network and that culture that supports the quieter people, the kind of the people who don't want the spotlight traditionally, to actually come to the fore and say, okay, like I think I have something to say and I think I'd like to try it.
That kind of feeds into the green flags for this, for engaging in this kind of advocacy. And I do think that a big sign that you're ready for it is if there is that kind of open, communicative, and forward thinking culture, along with a campus and a institution that is comfortable in like in sort of amplifying like a plurality of voices and a diversity of voices, And that's also a way that you can see like the real life values of the institution being reflected online. It's not necessarily about what you say, it's about whose voices you choose to amplify, right?
I also think there's like building on what Maria just said as well. It's by doing employee advocacy, you're trying to put your real life culture online. But actually, if you walk around the campus and the culture isn't there of having support groups for the minority groups, or having the facilities for open discussion, or having student bodies that have power, actually, what culture are you going to be transmitting online? And the culture probably isn't there for it.
Yeah. And so let's talk about a real world example here. So you guys are doing a partnership or have done a partnership with an organization called SRT. So first, tell us what SRT is and about how they're using kind of like their higher ed organization connection and what made them the perfect rollout for an employee advocacy work and program.
SRT fairs, they organize online and in real life fairs between all kind of the stakeholders within the student decision making as to what university they go to. So there's agents, there's students themselves, there's parents, there's universities. They do it globally. So they have it in LATAM, they have it in Europe, they have it all over the world. And they're essentially they give a space either in real life or online for all the people who are invested within the decision-making process for the student to actually get some real touch points. Because I think when students are making decisions, a lot of it can be made quite remotely. So this is an opportunity for students to meet people from a university, or for parents to go and online and talk to people from who may be teaching their children, or might be the admin team who are working with their children, or with agents who are working with families.
And when we're talking about the shift in where prospective students are looking and where they're going, we see more and more prospective students stalking like faculty LinkedIn profiles, and kind of doing their own research. And Maria, you shared a really great statistic about like LinkedIn has seen a steady increase in engagement to university pages, and other platforms just can't say that. So how should universities coach their faculty to show up authentically online without it feeling like another thing on their already packed to-do list?
So I think, it's really important to, first of all, I don't think you can browbeat people into employee advocacy. And if you do
What?
that,
What?
it's just not going to work. No, I think, you can frame it as an opportunity for faculty to show up as themselves, to share their enthusiasm for their specialism, and to share their knowledge, and to reach people outside their lecture theatres. And I think, if you're a student and you're looking at two different chemistry courses, and,
Yeah.
you've done your research, you've looked at the perspective, you decide to check out the faculty on LinkedIn, and you see one professor who is sharing their work, sharing interesting articles, like maybe like creating some little videos with introductions, that can really move the needle when people are making these choices.
Yeah, I also think that it's about the support that you put around the people who are doing it. So actually, you don't just say to people, "There you go and start posting." No, there has to be work done before that. A lot of
Mhm.
it's around empowering. It might be some training requirements to help people feel that they're able to write, because you know we know from experience internally, just because you can write for a client, it doesn't mean you can write for yourself. And so similarly
Yes.
for professors, they might be really comfortable writing a big white paper or some research, but to write a small short form post for social media is a different skill. So you have to do this prep work. Also, one of the things that you have to do is build the ongoing support. So do brainstorming and come up with ideas for posts. If people
Mhm.
want to have templates for designs so that they can post more in-depth information as a carousel, you need to put a little bit of effort behind that, because actually, once you put all this support around them, it feels like less of a task. It doesn't feel like an
Yeah.
add-on. And once you start kind of getting that kind of affirmation from strangers on the internet that what you're saying is interesting, actually it really is a good motivator. And we found internally, you start with a group of people, and actually when people see the response that the colleagues are getting, that FOMO kicks in and more people want
Mhm.
to join. Also, ongoing support, like you can have a WhatsApp group, a Slack channel, a Microsoft Teams channel. If you're in a university, maybe you can do a real life meetup and have a coffee, like the idea of in real life. I know it's this crazy idea, but actually having all this support from people who are going through what you're going through, having those same concerns, having those nerves, having that like, oh my God, I don't want to post. I don't know. Is it good? That actually takes away a lot of the kind of it's a chore. It's something I have to do, because you're part of a bigger team. And I think the team aspect really, really builds into kind of the motivation.
Great point, Ben. And it's actually something that we have seen internally, and that we also had as feedback from the SRT that, this project or this type of project wasn't just great for people building their external networks. It also really helped people to feel more connected to their colleagues, especially when you have a remote first team, or in the case of a university, you're on a big campus, people from different departments aren't necessarily communicating with one another on a weekly basis. And so it's a nice way to build connections within the workplace, as well as casting a broader net.
Let's take a quick pause for a word from our sponsor. Southeast Missouri State University needed to launch more targeted campaigns faster, yet they were bogged down by manual campaign builds, slow approvals, and vendor overload. With Element 451, they eliminated 5 vendor tools and gained marketing superpowers in one platform. They saw a 13% increase in applications, processed applications within 2 days, and achieved 33 to 35% email open rates. The impact? Personalized, automated campaigns running at scale, without the drag. Ready to turn your next campaign around in hours, not weeks? Try an agent today at element451.com/agents. Yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned too before, Marie, and I want to unpack that a little bit, because Gen Z and Gen Alpha, like, they are hunting for like multiple sources of truth. And you mentioned, and I think like one of the benefits and one of the things that employees can really take away from this is it's kind of like that anti-AI measure, right? Because they are looking for multiple sources of truth, and you can't get any more truthful than seeing your biology professor on LinkedIn like making a joke. So, but to that point though, how do you balance like empowering employees to share like their genuine perspective while also still maintaining kind of like that level of institutional alignment, right? Because you might have professors or you might have faculty that have a different opinion than maybe where the university stands, or they might have a different voice and tone and how they speak or what they say about the university. I'm curious of how you kind of balance and kind of guide employees to be both their authentic self, but how do you keep it aligned with that internal institutional brand?
Well, I think the first thing to say, and this is to go back to one of our red flags, like I think that if anyone enters into this with the expectation that the academics are going to read the tone of voice guidelines and all sound exactly the same, that's not going to work.
It's not what you want.
What? We
And
spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on these brand guidelines, and you're telling us not to use it? Have you lost it?
That's
It's
the
not going to work.
antithesis.
It's not going to work, but more importantly, like, it's not going to sound authentic. So I think there needs to be a level of comfort with a plurality of voice, perspective, tone. What I will say though, is I think when you set up this kind of program, what we've seen is like the initial workshops and the initial brainstorming sessions, when you have the participants together in a group, that's when this kind of gets drawn out. Like, what you're comfortable with saying and sharing and what you're not as comfortable with saying and sharing. A good rule of thumb for me is like, if you wouldn't chat about it in the office, don't put it on LinkedIn. That's like
You know what? Hold up. Let me write this down. Let me write that. That is such a good, that is such a good sandbox to play in.
I also think as well, like building on that point around kind of what would you say in the office? One of the things when we were working with SRT fairs was this idea of what's the tone of voice? How should I present these things? Actually, we said to them, you are talking to people every single day. You are talking to parents, you are talking to universities, you are talking to you are talking to lots of people. Say it in the way you would say it to them. Because actually, yeah, you can tweak it and you can maybe change certain words, but actually that's your tone of voice. Your tone of voice, you want it to be human, you want it to be warm, you want it to be empathetic, you want it to be that some people want to listen to it. So actually, for me, it's very much around how you would talk in the office. And as Maria said, what you would say, what you wouldn't say, and how you would say it. That is your tone of voice aspect. I'm also a little bit more kind of mean mommy because I'm really aware that kind of like when we were setting up the project, 'cause I was the one who was kind of writing the social media do's and don'ts. And I do think it's important that you provide people with a framework of what is and isn't acceptable at a very kind of high level, because otherwise too much freedom is scary. And so, I would imagine, like most businesses, universities are exactly the same, that when you sign up and you sign your contract and you sign your life away to them, part of that is an agreement with the do's and don'ts of social media. There'll be a social media policy, and that will have some restrictions in. And so when we say people can post about whatever they want, they can, but it still has to fall within the permitted areas. And that's not a bad thing. It's not silencing people. It's not censoring people. It's providing a framework that people can work under. And once they have that framework, they can then go off and they can post. One of the things that Maria and I always talk about with this for universities is that actually, for a lot of universities now, they're very scared to talk about DEI. And it may not be explicitly kind of written within their policies, but there's a fear about it for obvious reasons we don't need to go into. But having this
don't get me canceled. Don't get me canceled. It's my show. I can talk about what I want. We can talk about DEI all we want.
Freedom of speech. But having different people from different backgrounds and different belief systems and different religions and different sexualities and different gender, and however you want to break it down, actually having these people posting about your university, it walks the walk of DEI. So actually, it's a great way of getting around that kind of brand level fear, but still being able to actually demonstrate it. Because the reality is, nowadays, most people I know, I definitely don't. When a brand talks about how wonderful they are about something, I don't believe them. I need to see the proof. Maybe it's my age, maybe it's cynicism, but I think people increasingly want the proof. And actually, you're putting the proof out there.
Yeah, I think to sort of build on that as well, I think it's a great way for universities who have had to sort of talk less about DEI and about their values. It's a really effective way of doing a little bit of quiet marketing around that, because, we've seen the research. We know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are really values driven, that they are actively looking as consumers, as students, they're looking for things that align with their values. Now, putting your values on the front page of your website might draw some flack from the administration, but having your faculty posting about it on LinkedIn probably won't get the same amount of attention. And I think that, a good example is like, you can allow people to be a bit more political than the official brands. In terms of a personal example, like I really care about the climate and I post about that. Now that's not something that Hubbub posts about, and it's something that I choose to write about, but it doesn't matter because I don't really want to work with oil and gas companies, And so, but I think it's like it almost works as its own way of like the people who care about the same things will find you, and I think that can be true for faculty as well. Like it's a really powerful way of connecting with students over shared values that your faculty, your academics are posting about, but that you don't necessarily want to amplify in your own marketing and in your own communications.
And I think it kind of goes back to where you all were saying, like, employee advocacy, not everybody's ready for that, like tomorrow, where someone will hear this and say, well, we can do this, because there is that layer of uncomfortable. It's almost like the opposite side of what, and I mean, you guys work for a brand agency, like it's the opposite side of what we spend months and months and months of brand development around, right? We say, this is who we are, here's our colors, here's our voice and tone. And then you turn right back around to, our faculty and staff and say, be you. And you don't fit cleanly into that brand box. So it does, I think it will make people uncomfortable, like thinking about that, because you can't control what employees say on their LinkedIn channels or Instagram or Facebook channels. But to Maria, to your point, the diversity in what prospective students and parents and community will see, they see that the university is pedestaling so many different stories, so many different identities. And that's where that DEI work and conversation kind of just naturally plays out. But you do have to have a marketing center and a brand center that's okay with having people show up authentically on those channels that they can't control, that they can't stamp and take, the seal and slap it on there. You're not copying and editing every single LinkedIn post that's going out from every faculty member
no.
across every
Please,
camp.
no.
Nobody got time for that. So it is uncomfortable, I think, for people just to think that they've got to let up that control, but having that employee advocacy and that authenticity come through is actually the gold mine.
Yeah,
absolutely.
100%.
Like, I think
100%.
it's a little rough around the edges. It's authentic. Crucially, is something that AI cannot compete with.
Right.
And that is huge.
And I think that kind of like rough around the edges aspect of it, that's actually what people want. Like these beautifully curated, perfect images that are presented, that actually for the average person, they don't see themselves in it. Like they look and they like, it can have all the kind of the DEI tick boxes if that's been done. But actually, when things are too perfect, I don't know, for me personally, it's very difficult to connect with that. So that kind of like weird in the norm, having those slightly, maybe a word's misspelt, or maybe it's a point of view that's not 100% the norm from the university. That's the little nuggets of gold. That's the bits where people go, wow, this is a real person here. This is somebody I might actually want to be taught by, or I might want to learn alongside. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. And going back to what you were saying about like people being a bit stressed about the messaging going out, we always kind of say between us, just relax, just unclench, like let people do it. Like, really? The worst of the worst case scenario is if something goes out and you're deeply unhappy with it, you can request it gets taken down, or you just recognize that, do you know what? Tomorrow it's forgotten. Like unless you're saying something truly awful, in which case you probably wouldn't select this person for the program, and you hopefully wouldn't have them working at your university, although that's probably,
or even going back to what you were saying, is like if the guideline is like, if people have autonomy to post about their role or about their life and what they're doing, if you, like you said, if you wouldn't say it on campus in front of students, in front of other faculty or staff, then we're not posting that. And you kind of keep that same energy, that actually keeps, I think, that at bay, because you're not going to say that off color, off the handle thing in front of a student or in front of a faculty or your dean or the provost or whoever it may be. So it naturally wouldn't make its way online, we would hope.
No.
So,
and you know what? If they would say it in front of people and they say it online, then let's hope that they get into trouble for it, because these aren't people who should be working with young people and educating them. So, for me, it's a bit of a win-win.
Yeah. So I think that you can definitely do a little bit of background, when you're looking at possible participants for the program as well. Just to see, like, okay, how does this person show up on campus? How do they show up with their colleagues, with their students? If you have someone that you've had complaints about in the past for whatever reason, that's probably a no. So there is also that level of I don't want to see gatekeeping, that's the wrong word, but there's like a level, there's a filter, at the start of the program as well, where you can look at the possible participants and just make sure that there are people who generally show up in like a respectful way that aligns with your institution's values.
Yeah, the selecting the right people is one of the most crucial parts of the whole process. And actually, as Maria said, you have a world of information around you when you're doing that. So it's important, but it's not actually as difficult as maybe people may think.
Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about like the SRT partnership and other employee advocacy programs that you all have rolled out, can you tell us what you mentioned earlier, the kind of like social media guidelines, right? Where you're looking at what's already in the handbook versus what might need to be updated. What are some other tactics that with that SRT partnership and other programs, what are some of those specific tactics that have kind of actually moved the needle and that you all have seen pretty great success with when it comes to rolling out employee advocacy programs at a university?
I think the big one for me is like the way that you kick the program off, because the
Mm-hmm.
way that we have done it in the past is we start things off with a workshop. But part of the workshop is a creative brainstorming session at the very start of the project. Everyone gets involved. We sort of give people quite clear parameters to work within based on, you know, the institution's value propositions and things like that. But what happens when you impose those kind of parameters is it actually really boosts people's creativity in a really interesting way. And once we've done that creative brainstorming, it gives people a library of ideas that they can use for inspiration for posts. So I think that is something that has made it very easy for people to succeed. That, you know, not everybody wakes up every day feeling inspired. Don't know about you guys, but I certainly don't.
What? Every day I've got something
Every
new, Maria. I
moment.
don't know what you're talking about.
But, you know, on those days where people are maybe like, oh, I'm just not feeling it today, or I'm not feeling inspired, I don't have an idea, but they have a library that they can go to that they can pull from. It also helps, you know, people can then create a month's worth of like stuff at a time and schedule it. And, you know, so it doesn't feel like such a day-to-day chore. And that is something that people have shared has really, really helped with their sort of motivation and being able to like keep up and post regularly.
Yeah, and building on that kind of idea, one of the things that we discovered in brainstorming is it's much easier to brainstorm an idea for a colleague who you know than it is for yourself. And so there's lots of, oh, but you're really good at this. You know about this. You can talk about this. So actually, you end up with this library of kind of things that everybody can put their own spin on, but also some posts that are very specifically focused on people's skill sets, areas of interest, whatever it might be. And that's actually really helps people as well. I think one of the kind of the really possibly the most crucial, in my opinion, part of it is the ongoing support. And so you need to select the right person to lead the project, or right people to lead the project. But because there are going to be times where people don't want to post for whatever reason, there are going to be times where inspiration might be lower. There are going to be issues that arise. And actually having ongoing support in whatever format it looks like I said earlier, it could be, you know, a WhatsApp group. It could be, we use a Slack channel in our office. We have, but there's lots of other things, you know, as we said, like you can maybe even go for a coffee with somebody. But having that ongoing support where you go, oh, I'm just not certain. Can you read this? Or I just don't know what to say about this. Or I just don't feel it at the moment. Like I've got stuff going on in my life and it's just, I can't get my head around it, you know, because it is employee advocacy, but it all comes back to a person. And I think it kind of ties back into the culture. So we kind of, you know, like full circle moment. You have to have that culture that, do you know what? Maybe somebody isn't feeling it for whatever reason. They've got things going in their lives and it's okay. You don't have to post this week. You can miss a couple of weeks. If you need to drop out temporarily, that's also fine. Because if you force people to post, like I think one of the big real learnings is when we started, we had an idea of people will post once a week. And then after this amount of time, it'd be easy for them. So we can get them to post twice a week. And actually the reality was people got into their own kind of rhythm of how often they post. And so some people post once a week, some people post more than once a week, and allowing people to have that flexibility really, really helps keep people motivated.
Hey, but sometimes higher ed and flexibility,
Well,
sometimes those words don't go together.
Again, back to culture.
Right.
no, I
Right.
think part of that culture, and another thing that has been, really effective, has been the monthly meetings, having that support, but also having a community of people who are also engaged in the program, who you can rely on to like jump on and like your posts. Because I think there's nothing sadder than putting a post out there and it's just like tumbleweeds, And so I think, and
And we've
that's
all
where,
been there.
but that's where like the internal team building comes from as well, because people are sharing like, personal stuff or their perspective, and you get conversations happening with external people, but also with internal people where you're learning more about your colleagues. And that's like really nice as well. So,
And I think that's particularly true at the beginning, because when you do first start posting, you haven't got an audience. You, like, for me, I don't think I'd ever posted on LinkedIn when I started. And so the idea of putting something out there and nobody looking at it, it was like, oh, but you knew you had your colleagues who were going to do it. And then as time goes on, what naturally happens is your colleagues will kind of start just commenting on things that are relevant to them or that they have points of view about. But it's okay, because you have your natural audience that you've built. You have your followers. You have the people who are interested in what you're saying. And then that's where the real kind of adding value to people's experiences, that's where it really kicks in. And then that's when it gets really exciting.
So question, I know we talked about how employee advocacy isn't for everyone. Ben, you had mentioned that a portion of this program starts with a culture audit. One, what does that include? And then two, is that work that can happen internal to the institution? Meaning, is that audit something that someone within the office can do, or is that better suited for external to come through and do the audit? Because I imagine people once say, oh yeah, we'll just do an audit, but just curious to know kind of what you've seen work best of how that culture audit gets done ahead of the employee advocacy.
I think it's kind of like the audit answers itself, because if you have an organization or a university that isn't willing to allow somebody else to come in and ask questions to people, that kind of tells you about the culture. If you have like, I don't know, a dean of a university or whoever it might be higher up, it's like, I will fill this culture audit in and I won't ask anybody any questions.
Or,
Then
in agency land where they're like, as an agency partner, you're like, we want to talk to one person from here and from here and from here. And we're just going to randomly pick people. And they're like, actually, no, you're only allowed to talk to these three people,
You're allowed to,
no one else.
You're allowed to talk to Brenda in finance. You're allowed to talk to David in accounts, and nobody else is allowed to speak to you. So it kind of, it's self-revealing. I think one of the things about kind of employee advocacy is organizations that don't have the culture don't really want to do it, because they don't have that openness to like, oh, this is a long-term thing. This is empowering my team. None of that are ideas that people have. Like, it's just not within the mindset of the powers of the university. I think a culture audit can be as simple as a Google survey. But again, you have to make sure that people, and I suppose it's a bit of a chicken and an egg type situation. You have to make sure that people feel comfortable enough to give honest answers. So it could be by anonymizing the survey. But if people don't feel comfortable enough to give the answers and you don't get any responses, that's your answer. Like if nobody's responding, I don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Then that's your answer. Like it's a shining a spotlight on you. But as I say, I think realistically, I think from my experience, you have people who are interested in it, and you'll normally have kind of one person within an organization or a university who's like, oh, this could be good. And then they have to chip away and chip away and chip away. And so it can be that somebody thinks about doing this and it takes 6 months before actually you even get to the culture audit aspect of it. So it's a great, like Maria and I both love it, but also it's not for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart.
And just to add on to that, I think, the culture audit is important, but I think that most higher ed marketers, if they're working within an institution, will already have a sense of whether or not this is something that would fly at their institution. They'll have that instinct based on how their ideas have been received in the past, the kind of things they've been able to do. A big sign for me is how comfortable people are with user-generated content in terms of their students on campus. If they are willing to give that freedom over to student creators, then I think that's a step in the right direction in terms of amplifying your academics' voices.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for this.
Thank you.
It is such an important conversation because I think right now we're just in this time where we're so focused on, the cliff, the enrollment cliff, and what do students need and what do students need? And I don't think we always take that extra step to look inside and say, well, what do our faculty and staff need right now to be energized and prepared for the next round of students coming in? So employee advocacy is a really great way to start. And you all have given us some really great insights and tactics on how to really bring that to life. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It has been so great to just chat about it and share ideas. And I've loved it. Thank you.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Employee advocacy, it ain't for everybody. But if you are going to make it for you, make sure you get that cultural audit and just let people, hey, I know this is going to sound crazy, be themselves. So keep walking the walk and keep talking those tactics. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to Talking Tactics. If you want to try out the tactics you heard on today's show, you get a full 10 from me. And I would love to hear about how you made them your own. You can find me by searching Safania, Safaniya, on LinkedIn. There's not many Safanias on there, so you'll be able to see me. And if you're enjoying Talking Tactics, please rate and review the show. The overachiever in me needs your feedback, and I'll certainly use it for confirmation or, optimization, depending on the review. And finally, if you just can't get enough great podcasts, the Enrollify Podcast Network delivers with an amazing selection of other marketing and admissions-based podcasts just for you. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com. See you next time.